The bright morning sun shone through the windows of the Global Defense Command Center as Admiral James Wilson stared at the strange object that had appeared in Earth's orbit just hours ago. The massive holographic screen showed a perfect sphere, about the size of a car, floating silently above the planet. Its surface gleamed with an odd, shifting pattern that seemed to catch and reflect light in impossible ways. "What do we know about it?" he asked, his voice calm despite the tension in the room. The control center buzzed with activity as military personnel and scientists worked at their stations, monitoring the mysterious visitor. "Nothing has come in or out, sir," reported Tom Baker, the head of orbital tracking. "It just appeared out of nowhere at 300 hours. No approach vector, no energy signature, nothing. It was just there." Wilson nodded slowly, his gray eyes fixed on the sphere. In his 30 years of military service, he had seen many things, but this was different. This was humanity's first concrete proof that they weren't alone in the universe. The room fell silent as a soft hum filled the air. Every screen in the command center flickered, then went dark. Before anyone could react, they all lit up again, displaying the same image. A tall, humanoid figure dressed in flowing robes that seemed to shift color with each movement. "People of Earth," the figure spoke, its voice carrying an odd echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I am High Speaker Marcus of the Galactic Council. We have been watching your development for some time." Wilson straightened his uniform and stepped forward. As Earth's designated first contact officer, he had trained for this moment, though he never truly expected it to come. "On behalf of Earth, we welcome you. I am Admiral James Wilson." "Your name and rank are irrelevant." The figure cut him off with a dismissive wave. "We are not here for diplomatic relations. We are here to inform you of your obligations." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Wilson felt his jaw tighten, but kept his expression neutral. "Obligations. Yes. As a developing world within Council space, you are required to pay tribute. The Council demands 30% of your planet's total resources, renewable and non-renewable, to be collected annually." A murmur of disbelief spread through the command center. Wilson heard someone whisper, "They can't be serious." He shared the sentiment but maintained his professional demeanor. "That's a significant demand," Wilson said carefully. "Our world's resources are essential for our continued development and survival. Perhaps we could discuss more reasonable terms." The hologram's expression didn't change, but something in its tone became colder. "This is not a negotiation, Admiral. The Council has ruled. As a primitive species, you should be grateful we're only demanding 30%. Many worlds pay more." Wilson's hands clasped behind his back, knuckles white but voice steady. "And if we decline?" "Decline." High Speaker Marcus actually laughed, the sound artificial and hollow. "You misunderstand. This is not an offer. It is an instruction. You have 30 Earth days to prepare your first tribute. The collection ships will arrive then. Any resistance will be met with consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Wilson asked, though he already knew the answer. "The kind that primitive species don't survive." The hologram's robes rippled with dark colors. "We have brought peace and order to over 300 civilizations. Those who refused our guidance are no longer capable of refusing anything." The threat hung in the air like a physical thing. Wilson looked around the room. Seeing the mix of fear and anger on his people's faces, he turned back to the hologram, mind already working through possibilities. "You've given us much to consider," he said diplomatically. "How should we contact you if we have questions during the preparation period?" "Questions?" Another dismissive gesture. "The instructions are simple enough for even your primitive minds to grasp. 30% of all resources. 30 days. The beacon will remain in orbit to monitor your compliance." The hologram flickered, then added, "Oh, and don't bother trying to study or interfere with the beacon. It's far beyond your technological capabilities. Any attempt to do so will be considered an act of aggression." With that, the figure vanished, leaving the screen showing only the floating sphere again. The room erupted in voices, everyone talking at once about the implications of what had just happened. Wilson raised his hand for silence. When the room quieted, he turned to Dr. Linda Ross, their chief scientist. "What do you make of it?" She pushed her glasses up her nose, frowning thoughtfully. "Several things stand out, sir. First, they're using quantum technology for communication, but it's inefficient. The power signature is all wrong for true quantum manipulation. Second, they called us primitive at least 3 times, which seems excessive for a simple resource demand. They're trying too hard," Wilson agreed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Like a schoolyard bully who's not quite sure of his position. He turned to the room at large. "Ladies and gentlemen, in the next few hours, every government on Earth will receive this same message. Panic will follow. The markets will crash. People will be afraid." He paused, making eye contact with key personnel. "But we're going to stay focused." Wilson walked to the central console and brought up a global map. "I want everything we have on that beacon. Tom, get me power readings, radiation signatures, everything. Dr. Ross, assemble your team. Even if we can't touch it, we can observe it. And someone get me the president. We need to convene an emergency session of the UN Security Council." As the room burst into activity again, Wilson looked back at the image of the sphere. Something about this whole situation felt off. The Council's technology, while impressive, didn't seem as advanced as they wanted Earth to believe. Their threats were too explicit, their dismissal too practiced. They'd called humanity primitive, but they'd also given them 30 days. That was either supreme confidence or a massive tactical error. Wilson intended to find out which. He watched as data began flowing across the screens, his teams already at work analyzing every aspect of this encounter. The Council clearly expected Earth to react with fear, perhaps even paralysis. They expected a primitive species to bow to their demands. What they didn't know was that humanity had been preparing for this moment for decades. Hidden bunkers around the world housed research that would surprise even the Galactic Council. Quantum physics breakthroughs that had been kept secret, weapons systems that had never been tested, unity protocols that had been drafted but never implemented. Wilson smiled slightly as he watched his people work. The Council had made 3 critical mistakes. They'd underestimated humanity's capabilities, they'd given them time to prepare. And most importantly, they'd threatened Earth's survival. Nothing united humans quite like a common enemy. "Sir," Tom called out, "you need to see these readings from the beacon. They're not what we expected." Wilson nodded and headed toward the monitoring station. They had 30 days to prepare Earth's response. It would be simple, direct, and if he was right about the Council's true level of technology, it would change the galaxy forever. The word was already forming in his mind. A single word that would be humanity's answer to the Council's demands. But first, they had work to do. The United Nations building in Geneva had never been so crowded. Leaders from every nation sat shoulder to shoulder in the main assembly hall, their usual political differences forgotten in the face of humanity's greatest crisis. The air was thick with tension as Admiral Wilson stood at the podium, finishing his briefing about the Galactic Council's demands. "That's what we know," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "They want 30% of Earth's resources, and they've given us 29 days to comply." He paused, letting the magnitude of the situation sink in. "Now we need to decide how humanity answers." The room erupted in voices. The Chinese premier stood first. "We cannot give in to these demands. 30% of our resources would cripple our civilization. But can we afford to refuse?" The British Prime Minister countered, her face pale with worry. "You heard their threats. They've destroyed civilizations before." Wilson watched the debate unfold, waiting for the right moment. Dr. Ross sat in the front row, clutching a tablet computer that contained information that would change everything. She caught his eye and nodded slightly. If I may, Wilson raised his voice over the growing argument. There's something else you need to know. He gestured to Dr. Ross, who stood and made her way to the podium. She adjusted her glasses, her hand steady despite the pressure of addressing every world leader simultaneously. 3 hours ago, my team completed our initial analysis of the Council's quantum beacon. What we found was unexpected. The room fell silent as she brought up a holographic display. Complex equations and energy patterns filled the air above their heads. The Council's technology is advanced, yes, she continued, but it's not as advanced as they want us to believe. Their quantum manipulation is crude, inefficient. It's like they're using a stolen textbook without understanding the fundamental principles. The Russian president leaned forward. What exactly are you saying, Doctor? I'm saying, she took a deep breath, that we're not as primitive as they think. In fact, in some areas, we might be ahead of them. Murmurs of disbelief filled the room. Wilson stepped forward again. Dr. Ross isn't alone in her assessment. Would the head of Project Oracle please stand? A tall man in the back of the room stood up. Professor Thomas Miller, the world's leading quantum physicist, had been working in secret for the past decade. Very few people in the room knew who he was. Ladies and gentlemen, Miller's voice was soft but carried authority. 15 years ago, we discovered something that changed our understanding of quantum mechanics. We kept it secret, developing it slowly, carefully, because we knew it would change everything. He pressed a button on his own tablet. The holographic display shifted, showing new equations that made Dr. Ross's eyes widen. This is impossible, she whispered. Not impossible, Miller smiled. Just highly classified. We've been preparing for something like this, even if we didn't know exactly what form it would take. The American president stood up. What exactly have you been preparing? A defense system, Miller replied. One that operates on principles the Council seems to have missed entirely. Their quantum technology is based on forcing quantum states to conform to their will. Ours works with the natural flow of quantum fields. Wilson took over again. What this means is that we have options, real options, not just surrender or destruction. The Indian Prime Minister raised her hand. But their ships, their weapons, surely they're still far beyond our capabilities. Maybe not, Dr. Ross interjected. Their entire communication system is built on flawed quantum principles. If their weapons use the same technology. She looked at Miller, who nodded in confirmation. Then they might be vulnerable. Wilson finished. More vulnerable than they know. The Chinese premier stood again. How can we be sure? We can't risk the survival of our species on theoretical physics. Miller walked to the front of the room, joining Wilson and Ross at the podium. It's not theoretical. We've built it, tested it, proved it works. He looked around the room. We just need to scale it up. Fast. How fast? Someone asked. 29 days, Wilson answered. We'll need every scientist, every engineer, every resource we can spare. And we'll need absolute secrecy. If the Council realizes what we're doing, they're watching us. The Japanese leader pointed out. Their beacon monitors everything. Dr. Ross smiled for the first time. No, they're watching what they expect to see. The beacon's quantum sensors are calibrated to their understanding of quantum mechanics. Our work, it's invisible to them. The room grew quiet as the implications sank in. Wilson looked at the assembled leaders, seeing hope begin to replace fear in their eyes. We have a choice to make, he said. We can give in to their demands, become another conquered civilization paying tribute to the Council. Or we can stand together, pool our resources, and show them exactly how primitive we really are. The American president stood. The United States commits its full support to this effort. Whatever you need. One by one, other leaders stood, pledging their support. Even nations that had been enemies for generations found common ground in the face of this threat. There's one more thing, Miller added when the pledges were done. We're not just building a defense system. We're building a message, one the Council won't be able to ignore or misunderstand. He brought up a new display, showing a complex network of quantum pathways. When they come to collect their tribute, we'll be ready. And our answer will be delivered in a way that will make it impossible for them to dismiss us as primitive ever again. Wilson watched as the world's leaders began organizing themselves into committees, arranging resources and personnel transfers, setting up secure communication channels. The fear that had filled the room an hour ago had been replaced by determination. In the corner of his eye, he saw Dr. Ross and Professor Miller already deep in discussion, their tablets displaying complicated calculations as they worked on scaling up the quantum defense system. 29 days wasn't much time to prepare for a confrontation with an interstellar civilization. But humanity had something the Council didn't expect: unity in the face of a common threat and technology they didn't understand. As the meeting continued, Wilson thought about the single word they would send in response to the Council's demands. It would be simple, direct, and backed by humanity's greatest scientific achievement. But first, they had to prepare. And every minute counted. The clock was ticking, but for the first time since the beacon appeared in orbit, Wilson felt truly confident about Earth's chances. The Council had made a serious mistake in underestimating humanity. Soon, they would learn just how serious that mistake had been. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, the Global Response Center hummed with activity. Screens lined every wall, showing progress updates from similar facilities around the world. 20 days had passed since the Council's ultimatum, and humanity was racing against time. Professor Miller stood at the main control station, watching as another successful test lit up the monitors. "Run it again," he ordered, his voice tired but determined. "We need to be absolutely certain." Dr. Ross walked up beside him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one, careful not to disturb the holographic displays floating between them. "The quantum field harmonics are stable," she said. "We've run this test 57 times now. And we'll run it 57 more if we have to," Miller replied, taking a grateful sip of coffee. "We get one shot at this, one chance to show the Council they're wrong about us." Across the room, Admiral Wilson was coordinating with military commands worldwide. Hidden bases had been activated on every continent. Weapons platforms that had existed only as theoretical designs were now being constructed at an unprecedented pace. Status report from Beijing, an aide announced. "Quantum shield facility is at 80% completion." Wilson nodded. "Tell them to maintain safety protocols. We need it done right, not just done fast." He turned to another screen. "How's the Moscow installation coming along?" "Ahead of schedule, sir. They'll be online in 36 hours. The Admiral allowed himself a small smile. The world had never been more united. Old enemies worked side by side, sharing resources and knowledge. Political differences had been set aside. Every nation had contributed what they could to the Global Defense Initiative. In one corner of the facility, a team of programmers worked tirelessly on the quantum virus that would carry Earth's message to the Council. It wasn't just a simple rejection of their demands. It was a demonstration of humanity's true capabilities. "Admiral," Dr. Ross called out, "you need to see this." She pulled up a new set of readings from the orbital beacon. "Their monitoring patterns are changing. I think they're getting suspicious." Wilson moved to her station, studying the data. "Can they detect what we're doing?" "No," Miller answered, joining them. "Our quantum signatures are completely invisible to their sensors, but they can see that we're not behaving like a frightened primitive species should. No mass panic," Wilson mused. "No worldwide chaos. No desperate attempts to mine more resources." "Exactly," Ross nodded. "We're too calm, too organized. It doesn't fit their expectations." Wilson considered this for a moment. "Then let's give them something to see. Contact all major facilities. Tell them to start the deception protocol." Within hours, carefully orchestrated scenes of panic began playing out around the world. Fake news broadcasts showed riots over resources. Empty trucks moved between mines and stockpiles. making it appear that nations were desperately trying to gather tribute for the Council. Meanwhile, in the hidden facilities, the real work continued. The quantum shield network grew stronger each day. Testing showed it could not only block the Council's weapons, but could redirect their energy back at them. 9 days, Miller said quietly, looking at the countdown display. 9 days until they come to collect their tribute. We'll be ready, Ross assured him. She pulled up the latest simulation of their defense system. Look at these numbers. Even if their weapons are twice as powerful as we estimate, the shields will hold. Wilson watched the simulation play out. The quantum virus was the key. It would spread through the Council's communication networks, using their own flawed understanding of quantum mechanics against them. Their weapons would be useless, their ships blind. Message from the Indian Ocean facility. An aide reported. Final calibration of the quantum transmitter is complete. They can broadcast our response across all Council frequencies simultaneously. Good. Wilson nodded. How many of their ships do we expect? Ross consulted her data. Based on their quantum beacon's communication patterns, at least 5 major vessels, probably more. They'll want to make a show of force, Miller added. Prove to any watching species that resistance is futile. Instead, they'll prove exactly the opposite. Wilson smiled grimly. Status of the backup systems. All in place, Ross reported. Even if they somehow manage to knock out half our facilities, we'll still have more than enough power to deliver our message. The next few days passed in a blur of final preparations. Every system was tested and retested. Every contingency was planned for. The fake panic on the surface continued, feeding the Council's satellites exactly what they expected to see. 3 days before the deadline, Wilson called everyone in the main facility together. Hundreds of scientists, engineers, and military personnel gathered around the central platform. I want to thank you all, he began. What you've accomplished in the past 27 days is nothing short of miraculous. You've not only built an unprecedented defensive system, but you've also proved that humanity's greatest strength is our ability to work together. He looked around the room, meeting the tired but determined eyes of his team. In 3 days, the Council will learn that they made a serious mistake. They thought we were primitive because we haven't spread across the galaxy. They never considered that we might have been focusing our development inward instead of outward. Dr. Ross stood beside him. Every test has been successful. The quantum shields are ready. The virus is primed. Our message will reach not just the Council ships, but every species in their federation. And after that, Miller added, the galaxy will never be the same. Wilson nodded. Return to your stations. Complete your final checks. When the Council arrives, we'll show them exactly what humanity is capable of. As the crowd dispersed, Wilson looked at the main screen showing Earth from orbit. The Council's beacon still floated there, arrogantly monitoring what it thought was a primitive world preparing to surrender its resources. In 3 days, that beacon would be the first to receive humanity's response. One word, carried on quantum frequencies the Council didn't even know existed, backed by technology they couldn't understand. It's amazing, Ross said softly, following his gaze. They traveled across the galaxy to find us, but they never imagined we might have discovered something they missed. Wilson smiled. Sometimes the best way to advance isn't to reach for the stars, but to look deeper into the nature of reality itself. The countdown continued. Humanity was ready. All that remained was to deliver their answer to the Council's demands. A single word that would change everything. The massive Council ships appeared exactly on schedule, materializing in Earth's orbit like enormous black shadows against the stars. 7 vessels in total, each one larger than the largest city on Earth. Their arrival was meant to inspire fear and awe in the primitive species below. Instead, in the underground command center, Admiral Wilson simply checked his watch. Right on time, he said calmly. Are we ready? Dr. Ross nodded, her fingers moving across her control panel. All facilities report green status. Quantum shields are powered up but inactive. They can't detect them. "Multiple communications incoming," announced Tom from his station. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies." The main screen lit up with the familiar figure of High Speaker Marcus. His holographic form seemed even more imposing now, clearly meant to intimidate. "People of Earth, your grace period has ended. We trust you have prepared the required tribute." Wilson stepped forward, allowing himself to be seen in the return transmission. "High Speaker, we've been expecting you. Before we proceed, we have a response to your demands." "A response?" Marcus laughed, that same hollow laugh they'd heard 30 days ago. "Your only response should be compliance. But please, demonstrate your primitive understanding one last time." Wilson smiled slightly. "Professor Miller, Dr. Ross, are we set?" "Everything is in position," Miller confirmed. "All quantum transmitters aligned. Global shield network is ready," Ross added. "Virus payload is primed." Wilson straightened his uniform and looked directly at the hologram of Marcus. "High Speaker, on behalf of Earth, I present our response to your demand for tribute. It's a simple message, just one word." Marcus's expression showed only bored amusement. "And what word would that be?" "No." The moment Wilson spoke, Dr. Ross activated their quantum transmitters. That single word rode across frequencies the Council didn't know existed, carried by technology they couldn't understand. It hit their communications network like a thunderbolt. On every Council ship, in every system, on every screen and holographic display, that same word appeared. No, but it wasn't just a word. It was a key that unlocked the quantum virus humanity had prepared. Marcus's hologram flickered, his confident expression turning to confusion. What is this? What are you doing?" "Showing you exactly how primitive we aren't," Wilson replied. "The Council ships tried to raise their weapons, but nothing responded. Their quantum-based systems were being rewritten from the inside out. The virus spread through their network at impossible speeds, using their own communication channels against them." "Impossible." Marcus's voice cracked with genuine fear. "Your species doesn't have this level of technology. You can't understand quantum mechanics at this level." "Actually," Dr. Ross stepped forward, "we understand it better than you do. Your entire system is based on brute force manipulation of quantum states. We learn to work with them naturally." Miller joined them, bringing up displays showing the virus's progress. "Every ship in your fleet, every communication system in your network, they all operate on the same flawed principles. You never questioned your basic assumptions about quantum mechanics." The Council ships tried to fire their weapons. Energy beams lanced out toward Earth, only to splash harmlessly against the now visible quantum shields. The shields didn't just block the attacks, they absorbed the energy and redirected it back at the ships. "Their primary systems are failing," Ross reported, watching her monitors. "The virus has complete control of their network. It's spreading to every Council facility in range." Marcus's hologram stabilized, but his arrogant demeanor was gone. This is impossible. You were supposed to be primitive. Weak. We've done this hundreds of times before." "Then you've bullied hundreds of species before," Wilson said firmly. "But that ends today. The virus we've uploaded doesn't just control your systems, it's transmitting proof of your deception to every species in your Federation." On auxiliary screens, they could see the effects spreading. Council ships across the galaxy were going dark as the virus exposed the fundamental flaws in their technology. Species that had paid tribute for centuries were watching their oppressors' power crumble. "You don't understand what you're doing," Marcus shouted. "The Council maintains order. Without us, there will be chaos." "No," Wilson replied calmly. "There will be freedom. And cooperation. We've already proven that different species can work together without threats and tribute." The Council ships hung powerless in orbit, their once impressive bulk now seeming more like empty shells. The quantum virus had stripped away their technological advantages, revealing the truth behind their power. "Admiral," Ross called out, "we're receiving transmissions from other species. They want to talk, to thank us. Some are offering alliance." Wilson nodded. Open channels to any species that wants to communicate. It's time for a new kind of council, one based on mutual respect and genuine cooperation. The hologram of Marcus flickered one last time. You'll regret this. The galaxy needs order. The galaxy needs progress, Miller corrected him. Real progress, not just stealing technology you don't fully understand and using it to bully others. The High Speaker's image vanished, along with all power signatures from the Council ships. They hung in orbit like massive monuments to the end of an era. Their crews are requesting assistance, Tom reported. Life support is failing. Send rescue ships, Wilson ordered immediately. Show them how a civilized species treats others, even former enemies. As Earth's ships moved to assist the stranded Council vessels, Wilson looked at the main screen. The word "no" still floated there, a simple message that had changed the galaxy forever. Status report, he called out. Quantum virus has reached approximately 60% of Council space, Ross replied. Their entire network is collapsing. But our patterns, our real quantum technology, they still can't detect it, can't counter it. And the other species? Most are celebrating, Miller said, monitoring the incoming transmissions. Some are already dismantling Council facilities on their worlds. A few are asking for our help in developing their own quantum technology. Wilson smiled. Then we have work to do. Humanity's first steps into the galaxy won't be as conquerors or tribute payers, but as teachers and allies. The command center burst into activity as they began coordinating with their new interstellar partners. Earth's response to the Council's demands had done more than just protect their independence. It had reshaped the galaxy's power structure in a single day. Outside, the sun rose over the Rocky Mountains, its light reflecting off the quantum shields that now visibly surrounded Earth. Humanity had faced its first major galactic challenge and emerged stronger. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They would never be called primitive again. 3 months after humanity's response to the Galactic Council, the United Nations building in Geneva hosted a very different kind of meeting. Representatives from 27 alien species filled the assembly hall, their diverse forms a testament to the variety of life in the galaxy. Admiral Wilson stood at the podium, looking out at what would become known as the first summit of free worlds. Welcome to Earth, he began, his voice carrying to all corners of the room through universal translators. 3 months ago, many of us were under the Council's control. Today, we meet as equals, as friends, and as architects of a new galactic future. In the front row, Dr. Ross sat next to a tall, crystalline being from the Centauri system. Professor Miller was deep in discussion with a group of scientists from various worlds, their hands moving animatedly as they discussed quantum mechanics. The Council's power is completely broken, Wilson continued. Their remaining ships have been converted for peaceful purposes, their weapons dismantled. But more importantly, their lies have been exposed. A holographic display appeared above the assembly, showing the true extent of the Council's deception. They had stolen technology from countless civilizations, understanding just enough to use it as a weapon of control. Their supposed superiority had been built on theft and intimidation. But from their fall, something new has emerged, Wilson smiled. In just 3 months, we've seen extraordinary cooperation between our worlds. Knowledge is being shared freely. Trade routes are being established. Cultural exchanges have begun. The representative from Proxima B, a being of living light, rose to speak. Earth showed us more than just resistance to the Council. You showed us a better way. Your quantum technology works with the universe instead of trying to dominate it. This philosophy could change everything. Dr. Ross stood, bringing up new data on the display. We've already seen incredible advances. When we combine Earth's quantum understanding with the unique technologies of other worlds, we're achieving things the Council never dreamed possible. The displays showed new developments. Clean energy systems that could power entire planets, medical technologies that could cure previously untreatable conditions, faster-than-light travel systems that were safer and more efficient than anything the Council had used. But perhaps most importantly, Miller added, we're learning from each other. Every species brings unique insights, different ways of thinking. Together, we're solving problems that none of us could solve alone. The assembly hall buzzed with excited discussion. Species that had been isolated under council rule were now forming alliances, sharing discoveries, building friendships. A small reptilian being from a world near the galactic core raised a hand. What of the council members themselves? What becomes of them? Wilson's expression grew serious. Those who committed crimes will face justice, but many council worlds were themselves victims of deception. Their people kept ignorant of the truth. We've offered them the same thing we offer everyone, a chance to join our alliance as equals. The displays shifted to show the former council headquarters, now transformed into a center for galactic cooperation. Former council ships, their weapons replaced with scientific equipment, carried diplomatic missions between worlds. The word no that we sent 3 months ago, Wilson continued, wasn't just a rejection of tribute. It was a rejection of the very idea that any species has the right to dominate others. It was a statement that true progress comes from cooperation, not control. Dr. Ross brought up another display, showing the spread of quantum shield technology throughout allied worlds. We're not keeping our discoveries to ourselves. Every world that joins our alliance gains access to all our shared knowledge. But more importantly, they add their own knowledge to the pool. The council thought they were strong because they could take what they wanted, Miller added. We're proving that real strength comes from sharing what we have. The assembly erupted in applause. Species that had once feared each other now worked side by side. The universal translators struggled to keep up with all the excited conversations happening at once. Wilson raised his hand for quiet. But our work is just beginning. We've received contact from dozens more species at the edges of known space. Some were under council control. Others were hiding from them. All of them want to join what we're building here. The displays showed the growing network of allied worlds, spreading across the galaxy like a web of light. Each point represented a civilization bringing its own unique contributions to their shared future. The council called us primitive because we hadn't spread across the galaxy. Wilson smiled. They never understood that sometimes the best way forward is to look deeper, not just wider. By understanding the fundamental nature of quantum mechanics, we did more than develop new technology. We discovered a new way of thinking about our place in the universe. Dr. Ross stood again. The quantum principles we discovered show that everything in the universe is connected. When we work against these connections, we create conflict and waste energy. When we work with them, we achieve things that seem impossible. Like 27 different species sitting in the same room, planning a future together, Miller added, generating laughter from the assembly. Wilson looked out at the gathered representatives. 3 months ago, Earth was facing a demand for tribute. Today, we're hosting the first true gathering of free galactic civilizations. We've all learned that the best tribute any species can offer is their knowledge, their creativity, and their friendship. The assembly rose in a standing ovation. Through the windows of the UN building, the Swiss sunset painted the sky in beautiful colors. Earth's quantum shields, now visible as a subtle shimmer in the atmosphere, stood as a reminder of how far they'd come. In orbit, ships from dozens of worlds moved peacefully through space, their crews working together on joint projects. The Council's threatening black vessels have been replaced by a rainbow of different designs, each reflecting the unique culture of its builders. As the applause died down, Wilson smiled at his colleagues. The single word that had changed everything, no, had led to something greater than any of them could have imagined. Humanity's first step into galactic society hadn't been as conquered subjects or reluctant tribute payers, but as leaders in a new age of cooperation and discovery. The future was bright, and it belonged to everyone.